Tom, I know you've been talking about it on the French side. The budget's out there. Give me your first take, if you would.
11. 11. We can say it in either language. We have a budget deficit this year of $11 billion. It's an unbelievable number. But let's take the starting point, because when the CAC came to power, there was a $7.5 billion surplus on the books that they promptly spent. They've taken $8 billion out of the so-called Generations Fund. This is there you put aside to try to reduce the debt eventually for future generations. They've dipped into that. They've broken, of course, the Balanced Budget Act, but of course they haven't done much with that since they got there. They've taken billions out of the emergency fund, the sort of foresight fund that exists to look at things over the horizon. So you're supposed to do that when you're good managers. But now the CAC is sending out the signal, look, we're in our 6th year in power, but we've learned you can't say yes to everybody, and we're going to start managing if you don't learn how to do things right. So it's just an absolute admission of total failure. I remember in the 2018 campaign, one line that Legault kept repeating over and over again was that he was an accountant. He knew how to manage. He had had some of the top jobs in Quebec City, and we should count on him. And you know what? A whole bunch of Quebecers bought into that, but now they're looking at this and they realize that we're paying a lot more for salaries, but that doesn't get one more nurse. It doesn't reduce waiting times in emergencies. People don't have access to GPs. That's just on the health side. With regard to education in the public sector, again, recent collective agreements, much better pay. Yay, that's a good idea for the teachers, but we haven't done anything to address the underlying problems, and there's no money to do that. That's the whole message from today. But they are increasing the cigarette tax by 1 penny per cigarette, so that should take care of a big part of the problem.
$2 a carton now, Tom, and then $2 a carton, I believe, next year. I mean, these are, that's 2 cents a cigarette. Yeah.
Cigarette. Yes. Yeah. So maybe I should stop being so cynical and realize that this is a mammoth economic system that they're piloting for us, and they know exactly what they're doing.
By the way, to that point, someone sent a text when they heard about the cigarette tax or the cost of the carton going up $2, saying, I think they budgeted, I may have gotten this wrong, $60 million and what that might bring in additional revenue. But to which someone says, no, all that's going to do is drive people to go buy cigarettes somewhere else, i.e., go to the reserve and buy them there. Why would you spend the extra money here? Because at a certain point, you keep raising the price, and someone says, okay, no, there's no reason for me to do this. I'm not going to do it anymore. So
yeah, and I mean, there's stuff in there. They're saying, oh, well, we're going to start really managing. We're going to ask like Lotto Quebec and Hydro Quebec and this Quebec and that Quebec to start restricting their own budgets. Yeah, but why haven't you done that for the first 6 years that you were there? You've been spending like drunken sailors. You have no clue what you're doing, and now you look at it and say, an $11 billion deficit. And by the way, there's a little bit of art, a bit of technique involved in putting up such a big number. Because, of course, when whoever is going to be the finance minister next year, and I have my doubts that it'll be Eric Girard, he actually gave a hint on that today. Whoever comes in next year as finance minister gets to say, boy, have we done a good job. Yeah. We've wrestled that deficit down to $7.5 billion. And then magically, in the year before the election, we got it down to $3 billion. Chump change, we're great. I mean, this is the type of trick that they're using. It's the Paul Martin trick, right? You announce the worst possible thing, and then when it comes in not quite that bad, you look a heck of a lot better than you would if things kept going north.
That's funny because someone south would be the direction. Someone just texting in, it seems the government is forecasting a very high deficit now. This sounds like it was exactly what you just said, so that during the next election cycle, which will start next year, they can say they performed better than expected and then increase handouts. So that's part of the playbook, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's a well-known playbook. It was written by the Libs under Chrétien Martin, but it's been carried out before. But it really is quite disturbing because there is there's no way of denying that the emergency wards of this province are still overflowing, and waiting times there are outrageous. You can't get the services that all of this money is supposed to be paying for. That's the bottom line.
I will ask, so I know there's a lot obviously to take in here. Is there anything from what you did see? And one of the issues that was brought up, and I want to make sure I got this right, the idea of the provincial sales tax. But people thought, well, maybe the government, given the deficit is as big as it is, would consider an increase there. So my understanding is there is not, but the government is apparently looking at finding areas that are not taxed now and considering taxing them. So that would amount to the same thing.
Well, they do one of those. So it used to be that if you were buying a secondhand car that was more than 7 years old, you could put it down as a nominal value of like $1 or something like that. And then they looked at the books and they said, well, last year we sold, I think the number was 150,000 cars in the province of Quebec for $1. So we're going to start taxing that. So that's $40 million. Now, that's not nothing. But when you realize that, they say they're going to go through all of the tax credits and all the things that are there and start removing some of the deals that have been made over the years. So you can imagine, you remember when you'd go from on the 40, you'd head westbound towards Ottawa, all along the 40, from Saint Laurent all the way to Saint Anne de Bellevue, every major pharmaceutical company in the world was there.
Yeah.
We had a massive, flourishing pharmaceutical industry, top-notch people, high education, great community types, big contributors in our society. And all of a sudden, they removed the base that was keeping them there, which was different credits. And those companies started to disappear. Almost all of them did. And the same thing's going to start happening. They say, well, we don't really need to keep subsidizing the digital games, the electronic games and that sort of market. Fair enough. There were big credits put in place. It was an idea of Bernard Laundrie's. It brought in a flourishing industry. It has created tens of thousands of jobs. These are, again, top-of-the-line jobs, new economy type jobs. So they say we're going to start peeling those back. But this is like Sorcerer's Apprentice stuff. They don't know how much, a company that makes these video games, how much they're relying on that. Will they simply say, well, we're going to pick up stakes and go somewhere else that's offering us a sweetheart deal and take the jobs with us? That's the type of thinking that's required. But when you're just looking at an $11 billion deficit, say we got to reduce somewhere, we're going to remove some of these tax credits, I don't think that anybody's had the time to do that homework.
With respect to doing some projection here, I guess, I mentioned it was a bit eye-opening to see Eric Girard only a week or so ago talk about restoring a balanced budget by 2027, 2028. And
Right.
then we find out today, he meant 2029, 2030.
Yes,
That's what the number is today.
As they were printing, the budget, they realized it didn't make any sense.
Hold the
and by
press.
the way, I said I'd get back to whether what he had mentioned today about not being around. At one point during his speech, he says, he uses the French feminine noun. He says "ma successeur," so my successor, the woman who will be my successor. And so he got asked about that in the hallway by one of my colleagues, and he said, I've worked in the field for a long time, more women than men, and I'm just assuming that my eventual successor will be a woman. But I can tell you that I actually know from the highest level that Girard is very interested in going to Poilievre's Conservatives, and whether or not that comes to pass, I don't know, but I know he's very interested in it. And I have a feeling, despite the fact that there were some unseemly things said by some of the minor staff around Poilievre, that Poilievre's no fool, and he's got senior advisors who say this guy might give us a bit more oomph in Quebec. So keep an eye on that. Despite the Los Angeles Kings $7 million that I was expecting they would cancel, but they didn't. I think that Eric Girard has been a pretty decent finance minister who's been trying to reel in François Legault for the past 5.5 years and hasn't completely succeeded.
Although I will say that's a hard sell, isn't it, to have voters here. Here's the guy who just handed you an $11 billion deficit, and now we're supposed to look and go, hey, now he's running for the federal Conservatives. He seems like a good guy. How does that work?
For the federal Conservatives, don't forget, on the West Island, and so I have a feeling that he's always that's the party that's closest to his heart.
Okay.
And name me another high-level Quebec economist with credibility and political experience who's willing to announce that they're conservative. I don't know a whole bunch.
I can't think of any. Carlos Leitao would never do that, so that would scrap the only other one I know.
Yep.
Okay. Last question I have here. This was brought up by Dawn when she was reporting just off the news. So there's $187 million in this budget for the promotion of the French language, but only $127 million for the environment. There's a $60 million gap. What do you make of that?
Well, as a former environment minister, I think it says a lot. And one of the ways they say they're going to get to balanced budgets by 2030 or whatever, is to do a full program review, which is something you have to do in government anyway. You have to sunset things that are not important anymore, or no longer fulfilling a purpose. But I'm always leery when people say that this is going to be the big saving, because it's easy to go after places like environment and go after the budgets for environmental inspections. We know that that's not very popular with the CAC. They don't like the BAP hearings, for example, on a big project like Northvolt. So I'm going to keep a very close eye on that. You're never going to win an argument in Quebec that there should be a penny less on the French language.
Yeah.
And we just know that the CAC is famous for putting up numbers that are completely fake. When Pascal Derry did her announcement about the cuts to the English universities, she completely invented numbers with regard to tuition fees in Canadian universities. She completely invented how much these changes and the attacks on the English universities was supposed to bring into the French universities. It was all malarkey. None of it held together. So with regard to the 187 million for the French language, they're not going to touch it, Aaron.
I have one last thing to bring up, Tom. This is my suggestion. You might want to pass this on to Eric Girard. In order to raise some additional funds, I suggest that anybody who makes a complaint to the OQLF, which is done anonymously, be required to pay a fee. So you can file your complaint, but it costs you $20 or whatever to file your complaint. I think that could raise millions. What do you think?
I think you're having far too much fun.
All right. Tom Mulcair, back tomorrow morning with Andrew Carter just after 7:30. Thank you, Tom.